One of the biggest mistakes people can make is to say, I don't need the other half. I can just do this alone. It's like, no, men need women, women need men. And we are equal, but not equivalent. We're different. There's a deeper thing that's going on between masculine and feminine and men and women. And it's this versus when it needs to be together. Social media has a negativity bias, which means the algorithms are actually designed to hone in on the things that will get the most emotional reactions, and that's negativity. We have all these conversations about like rights and what rights people have, but we don't have a proportionate conversation about responsibility. Because responsibility actually requires you to do something rather than just be given something. The right is more masculine and the left is more feminine. Vast majority of journalists are left. The media establishment is majority left. The academia establishment is majority left. The government has been majority left. So the combination of these things actually reinforces a view that, hey, we're not biased at all. We're actually objective and they're biased.
Right.
We're so attached to our beliefs as if a belief dies, then we die.
Kaizen Asiedu. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thanks.
I'm a huge fan.
Appreciate that, man.
You just put out such good information in a time when everything feels so polarized and there's spin on pretty much everything. We've been doing a bit of talking on this show about how to curate an optimal information diet. You know, we live in food-wise, we live in a time with unprecedented access to ultra-processed foods. But I feel like on the information side of things, we live in a time of unprecedented ultra-processed information.
Yeah.
And I love your work because you help people really understand how to separate fact from fiction, how to better be able to identify spin and bias. And it's just so crucial.
I appreciate that, man. And I actually love the analogy of processed information. I've been playing with that myself, actually. But before we even get into it, I actually want to caveat a few things, if that's okay. Because sometimes I feel like people look at me and my work and they're like, oh, this is the guy who's unbiased. And that's not true. I'm biased. My belief is that everyone is biased because we all are subjects, right? We all have subjective viewpoints. We don't view reality objectively. So my work is not to hide my bias or tell people that I'm unbiased. It's to help people with how to think and come to their own subjective conclusions about what things should be and how the world works. And even if we all thought perfectly clearly, we would still arrive at different conclusions, right? Because we all have different values and things that matter to us. But yeah, I think we're in a time when people just feel so confused. And aside from the quality of information, the quality of the thinking is really poor. Just because we're not taught how to think, and we certainly weren't taught how to think in an era of open information and decentralization. So that's what I'm trying to help correct. In addition to getting my own viewpoints out in the world, because yeah, I have my own views on right, wrong, good, bad, and how the world, how America, how humanity ought to be.
Yeah, you're not telling people what to think. You're teaching people how to think, how to be more critical in terms of how to see the world through a more critical lens. Talk to us about because I want to get into your methodology. I know you do a lot of, you've got programs out. But your background, you've got a super interesting background. I mean, I'm obviously a fan of yours. I follow your work voraciously on social media, but, you know, in preparing for this interview, Harvard graduate, Emmy winner, crazy stuff. So yeah, maybe walk us through that and then we'll get into your methodology.
Yeah. It's the weirdest resume ever.
Yeah. Super.
Honestly. So I guess, you know, I'm not, it all makes sense, obviously, having lived my life, how it all connects. But I think just to maybe start from the beginning and just start about talking about the perspectives that I'm coming from, because it's unorthodox, right? So my parents are immigrants from Ghana, which is in West Africa, and I was born in the Bronx, New York. And growing up, I was pretty precocious, but wasn't very studious. Like, school didn't really engage me. It was just a thing that I did well at so that my parents would buy me stuff. So they were like, yeah, if you get good grades, you get video games. And I loved video games. I loved fantasy books. And in hindsight, I think what I really liked about them, because I like complex games in particular, is they just really honed my problem-solving skills. And I've always been a person who is in my head a lot, for better or worse. And because of that, I feel like when it comes to landscapes of the mind, I'm pretty adept. And I didn't really care about school until high school, when all of a sudden getting into Harvard became the most important thing in my life. And it came out of nowhere, honestly. Like it was like the summer before high school, and it's like a switch that's flipped on. I was like, I need to go to Harvard. And prior to that, my parents had really cared about it. Like it was kind of their American dream. Like move here, start a family, your kids go to Ivy League schools. And I didn't really care until all of a sudden I did. And I got in, and I was actually really depressed there. I was really lost. I felt miserable. I didn't really have any plan or thought beyond, let me get into this prestigious thing. It was like, just get the gold star. There was no real reason for me to be at Harvard, but to say that I went there. So I got there, and I was pretty lost, but the one thing that kept me going was video games still. So I played a lot of StarCraft, League of Legends. Not sure how much of a gamer you are, but
my brothers were addicted to StarCraft for many years. Yeah,
I was too. And the good news is I wasn't just consuming them; I was creating with them too. So I started a video game esports production company where we would run tournaments and do broadcasting in the early days. It was really fun, and that kind of kept me engaged with something creative. And in the background, I was taking philosophy classes because that was the one thing that was like, okay, this is pretty interesting. And I didn't get a conventional education in that or classical education in that prior. So it was a nice way to round out my education. But didn't really have any plans to do anything with a philosophy degree. Took some time off from school to just like sort myself out, realized I was unhappy, started really working on myself and going on my own healing journey that persisted throughout. Well, it actually really ratcheted up a few years ago, but persisted to some degree unconsciously throughout my 20s. I'm 35 now. And then I got a job at Riot Games working on League of Legends. So I went back to Harvard, finished my degree, moved out to California, started working on League of Legends esports and tournaments, and that's actually what I won an Emmy for. So that gave me like practical experience with working with people and organizations and how do I get a team of people to do something really big and creative. And it was a dream job. Like I really loved it. I was there for 8 years and then I quit, not because the environment wasn't good, but more because I wanted to see what I would be capable of if I just struck out on my own rather than work for someone else building their dream. So in 2020, I quit. And at that time, of course, COVID happened. So work distractions were stripped away because I had quit my job. Social distractions were stripped away because of COVID. And I had a lot of time to just be with myself. And I realized that despite graduating from Harvard and I won the Emmy and all of that stuff, I was still really feeling empty and unhappy. And frankly, a lot of the time I would go to sleep and be like, if I didn't wake up tomorrow, that would be okay with me.
Wow.
Yeah. And when I realized that, it was interesting because I kind of had a detached perspective on that because one of the good things I developed in my 20s, especially after graduating from Harvard and realizing I had a miserable experience there, was just a meditative practice. And that caused me to just be able to view myself outside of myself. And I realized, okay, this is like a fixable problem because clearly there's just something wrong with the way that I'm thinking about myself, thinking about the world. And went really all in on the healing and all this esoteric stuff and plant medicine, meditation, energy work, all of that stuff. And toward the end of 2023, I went to Egypt on like what I thought was going to be a spiritual pilgrimage. Like, let me find out my past lives and, you know, what people do. And what actually happened was it was the week of October 7th and Hamas's attack in Israel. And I knew nothing about the conflict, and I didn't even really pay attention to the news. I thought the news was dumb. I was like, politics is dumb. I remember voting for Obama in college just because I was excited because I was like, hey, his skin color looks like mine, and he talks really good. But that was pretty much it.
Yeah.
And but October 7th, 2023, being in Egypt so close to where the conflict was happening was a huge wake-up call. And I was like, wow, I've been so much in my bubble, focused on my inner experience, and I was life coaching and helping people in transformation. And then I realized, whoa, like humanity's in crisis. Like we are so unable to resolve conflict, so divided. Even within the group of people that I went to Egypt with, these are people who are like healers and therapists, and they couldn't get along. I was like, if these people can't get along, no wonder the rest of the world is having these kinds of issues. So after that, I decided, okay, I just want to help more with the outside world. Like I feel like I'm actually pretty good now and felt good about myself and relatively clear. And that's when I started paying attention to the 2024 election. And it was interesting because, people were like right and left and Trump and Biden and all that. But for me, it was actually just a really interesting observation of the human condition. Because I saw a lot of unclear thinking, a lot of emotion masked as thinking. I saw a lot of people just parroting what they'd heard from one another and forming really strong convictions about people that they didn't know based on information they hadn't actually researched and based on highly processed information from the media.
Yeah.
And I was someone who had been a default Democrat. I mean, just like, I hate terms like racial terms like black, white. That's a whole nother thing. It's all made up. But yeah, being black and being from New York and going to Harvard and living in California, it was like just Democrat echo chambers everywhere. So I remember just starting to realize how much of the opinions that I had were not actually my own. And I wanted to just revisit my priors about Trump, about his first term, about all of that, just to understand, right? Like I wasn't looking for some political awakening, and then I got one. And I think the first thing that started, it wasn't even about politics. It was more about helping people see past media bias. Because I realized what was happening was they didn't have diverse information diets at all. Like I remember I had just listened to New York Times. And for me, I was like, New York Times, they're the truth, objective. Fox News, those people are crazy. That was very clear. Little did I know, it's like, no, this is the left and that was the right. And I didn't understand the right, but they had a perspective, just like I have a perspective that my information is filtered through. And when I realized that, I just started pointing this out to a lot of people. And I think, look, there's obviously bias on the right as well, but because the left was native to me, I just felt more attuned to that bias there. So I started pointing it out, and coinciding with that was my own political shift. And I think as I've changed and grown, I've become more conservative in my viewpoints. I don't love the labels and identifying as like conservative or the right. I like to think of myself as someone who just thinks for himself and is aligned with particular groups at particular times. So yeah, one layer of my journey is like my political journey, but the other layer is just helping people to think for themselves or trying to provoke them into thinking for themselves. Because as you said, the what you think, this stuff is changing so fast. Like we don't even remember the controversy from 72 hours ago, right? Like it's like tariffs, and then there's Gaza, and then it's Russia, Ukraine, and then it's Epstein. It's like so overwhelming. And I think we easily lose sight of the fact that we're not even processing the information on the issue right in front of us before we move on to the next thing, right? It's like gorging yourself on seafood and then immediately moving on to Italian and then moving on to Asian, and you haven't pooped yet.
Yeah.
So it's like we need to learn to sit, take our time, process the information, try to really understand it before we move on, because what's happening is we have mental constipation at this point.
Mental constipation. Wow, you're so right. Your journey mirrors, I think, that of many, including my own. I'm also born and raised in New York City, and I, for the entirety of my life, would have considered myself a Democrat by default, just because of the guise of plurality and altruism and virtue that side of the aisle tends to wear. But then at a certain point, I realized that both sides of the aisle want the same thing. They just have different ideas of how to get there. And post-college, I worked for Al Gore. I worked for a TV network called Current TV. So I was a journalist on an Al Gore founded TV network. And I voted for Obama twice. But at a certain point, it started to dawn on me that media bias is everywhere, but there's something I think really insidious and problematic, in particular about left-leaning media, that it wears the sort of facade of rigor and of objective truth, whereas Fox News, they tend to wear, and other right-leaning media tend to wear their bias on their sleeve, but they're both just as biased. Yeah, they're both coming at it with an ideological bent. And to me, it's a lot more problematic that one is just less transparent about it. So it becomes, I think, a lot harder when you're in those echo chambers to see beyond them, because you're like, well, I'm on the side of objective rigor. I follow the science. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, what you just said at the end there, I think really encapsulates how the bias on the left is different than the bias on the right. Because, look, the vast majority of journalists are left. Like the multiple surveys, and think about it. The media establishment is majority left. The academia establishment is majority left. The government has been majority left. So the combination of these things actually reinforces a view that, hey, we're not biased at all. We're actually objective, and they're biased.
Right.
So there's several layers of societal reinforcement that I actually don't see on the right as much. The right has its own issues, and I think a lot of like how they communicate is my bigger issue with the right. But on the left, I think there's actually a lack of awareness of the fact that, hey, people who disagree with you are not evil.
Yeah.
It's just they're different. And I think when you're in the left echo chamber, it feels like you're almost the enlightened ones because, yeah, all the elites, like, again, academia, media, and government are all telling you that too. So
your favorite celebrities.
Yeah, all the elites, all the people who are celebrated in society are like that. Whereas, I mean, if you think about it, how many conservative celebrities are there? How many conservatives are there in Hollywood? There's like none.
Yeah, very few.
Right? I mean, even
Zach Levy.
I don't even know who that is.
He's the only one, yeah.
Yeah. And the fact that Trump even won the popular vote was something because Republicans never win the popular vote, not in the recent few decades. So, yeah, there's a different mechanism by which left liberal bias works versus conservative bias. But, yeah.
So how do we see through this? How do we improve our information diet?
Yeah. Well, I think you can, by analogy, compare it to how do we improve our food diets. You want to have diversity. You don't want to just be eating the same things over and over because, yeah, if you're just consuming Fox News and Breitbart and Daily Wire, then you're going to be missing out on the perspective that New York Times and MSNBC legitimately have to offer, and vice versa. Most people, especially in the era of social media, do not have diverse information diets. They get one source of information. Increasingly, it's social media. Social media is engineered to engage you, not to inform you. And the more that you engage with what it's giving you, the more it gives you that, right? Because they're not optimizing for truth. They're optimizing to make money because that's what businesses do. And I say that neutrally. It's just how businesses survive and they're telos. So the first thing to recognize is, hey, we're all biased. You are biased, I am biased, we're all biased, and we need to check that bias by intentionally going outside of our echo chamber, which is hard. It's really hard because it's ego-threatening to go seek out information that might contradict deeply held worldviews that you had. It's also socially dangerous because I remember when I first started. First it was RFK, and I was like, I like RFK. Like I'm done with the Democrats. RFK is my guy. And then eventually it was Trump. Both of those moves were really scary, right? Because RFK was getting called an anti-vaxxer, and I was like, I don't know. I've listened to a bunch of long form. I think it's actually more nuanced than that. And then Trump's being called Hitler, and I'm like, I don't know. I've listened to his long form. It doesn't sound like Hitler to me. I get why you don't like his views, but it's not that.
Yeah.
But it was scary because I was like, what is my family going to think? What's my community going to think? Like my friends were all liberal, or if they weren't liberal, they weren't very loud about it. So yeah, we got to start by recognizing we all are biased, adopting the intellectual humility that comes with that realization and trying to diversify. I think the second thing is actually understanding precisely how bias works. Because some people, they stop at, well, I know the media is biased. It's like, that's actually not enough. One of the most valuable things I got out of a philosophy education was understanding just the ideas of logic. That logic is not just this thing, this term that we use, like you're being illogical. No, it's a formal discipline going back to Aristotle. Like this is a formal discipline. And there are rules. There are rules for logical thinking versus illogical thinking. Unfortunately, we don't get taught that in school. At least very few places you get taught that in school. And one of the most valuable parts of me getting a philosophy degree is just realizing that, oh, there's a proper way to think. There's a way that if you order your thinking will be more likely to produce results you want in the physical world. So, you talked about the stuff I've developed, like that's currently what I'm feeling really passionate about, just developing modernized critical thinking tools and courses for people to just learn about this stuff from, because it's not very complicated actually. And then it's a combination of philosophy and understanding formal logic, and modern psychology, I think, actually has a lot to teach us about psychological biases. So a lot of the work of Daniel Kahneman, a Nobel Prize winner, I think he passed away recently, actually. So he has tons of great information, both in his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, and in his research papers about just, the ways in which the human mind is actually not rational or we're all susceptible to bias. So you have to learn specifically how the biases work, and then you just got to practice. You got to practice applying the tools that you've learned to all the information that you take in. It's kind of like when I don't know if you went through a health journey of like needing to awaken to health, but I did. And I remember part of getting healthy was just like realizing, oh, wait, like I can just read the nutrition label and become literate in this. And before something enters my body, let me read what I'm about to let into my body. Similar with my mind, right? If I'm going to have a feed of information, let me make sure I understand the quality of that information, the macronutrients, like how left versus how right is this, rather than just mindlessly consuming and piling everything into entertainment. It's like you go from like girls in bikinis to cats doing cat stuff to political information about the Middle East. It's like we're just jumbling it all together like it's all the same. So I think, first, understanding we're all biased. None of us is exempt. Understanding how the biases work, and then applying it to the information that we're consuming on a daily basis.
Brilliant. Can you speak to some of the more common logical fallacies that pervade our collective thinking today?
Yeah. So can I give you a bunch of biases and logical fallacies?
Please, yeah.
Okay. So one of the most common ones is motivated reasoning. And motivated reasoning is when you form a conclusion first, and then you look for evidence to confirm that conclusion rather than the other way around. And we see this on both sides. We see this everywhere in life, actually. So one of the common terms I think is funny that the right has is Trump derangement syndrome, which is when people say, no matter what Trump says, people would dismiss it. It's just because Trump said it. And actually, a great example of this was, do you see the Tylenol autism thing, the announcement and the reaction? And so basically, for those who don't know, RFK said, we're going to try to find out what's causing these increases in autism rates. People expected him to talk about vaccines, and I know he's investigating that, but actually the first major announcement that they had was that they found an association between Tylenol and autism. Doesn't mean it's causative, but it's correlated at least. And the way I perceived that was, oh, wow, cool. This is actually unexpected. So it shows me they're actually sincerely trying to figure this thing out. It's not just them on their hobby horse about vaccines. And this is important information for people to know, and we should be aware of the risks here. And then what I saw from a lot of people who just frankly don't like Trump was them dismissing the information, saying there's no science, it's not validated, when in fact there were studies from Harvard and Johns Hopkins and other institutions that people are very ready to listen to on other topics saying, there's a correlation here. It doesn't mean it's a cause, but there's something to pay attention to. So in response, you would see like women on TikTok downing Tylenol, pregnant women, to like make a political statement. I was like, wow, this is actually massive motivated reasoning. Because Trump said it, and it wasn't just Trump, but because Trump said it, you don't want to believe it. So that's one of the most common, I don't know if it's actually a cognitive bias or logical fallacy. Sometimes I mix them together. But errors in thinking that people commit where they dismiss something because of the source of it. Another formal fallacy is called genetic fallacy, where you dismiss something because of where it came from. So one of the errors that people commit is, oh, well, I know the media is biased, so this is what I see on the right, for example. It came from New York Times, so it can't be true. It's like, no, that's ridiculous. I know New York Times is biased, but they don't just lie all the time. Like, they do give me information that's useful. I just need to make sure that I filter it rather than just take it without any sort of processing or skepticism. People will do that as well. Another really common one, and this is, I think, accounts for some of the tribalism that we're seeing in the division, is group attribution error, which is when you take the attributes of one part of the group, often like a minority of the group, and you project it on the entire group. So people will say stuff like, oh, all the Democrats want open borders, or all the Republicans are anti-science. It's like, no, that's not true. Neither of these things are true. Is there a subset of each of those audiences that does want open borders or doesn't believe science at all? Of course there is, right? We live in a big country. There's 300 million people here. But what happens is, and again, this is with social media effect. The social media effect is that social media has a negativity bias, which means the algorithms are actually designed to hone in on the things that will get the most emotional reactions, and that's negativity. So because of the negativity bias, we get fed the most extreme examples of like fringe groups presenting themselves as if they're the whole movement. And then we say, see, I told you all the Republicans hate immigrants, or all the Democrats just want to put children through gender transition surgeries. And it prevents each side from even seeing each other as rational agents with different values. So yeah, I mean, I could talk all day about like social media, how it really plays on all these biases and fallacies big time. And yeah, I remember you familiar with Charlie Kirk? After he got assassinated, the governor of Utah, which is where it happened, he said social media is a cancer. And I was like, the more I look at it, the harder it is to dispute what he's saying, honestly. I mean, everything has positives and negatives, but it's a lot of negative. And we can't put the genie back in the bottle, obviously. And we're always going to build technology that it gives us a lot of power. But look, we have a knowledge to make powerful things, but we don't have the wisdom to wield it.
Well, that's exactly why I think your work is so important today, because social media, you're right, the genie's not going back in the bottle. And I think there are a ton of benefits to using social media. I mean, look at your rise in prominence, you know, and the spread of your work. I mean, my work is facilitated by social media and the tools that it's given me, and you know, being able to harness technology, long form conversations via podcasting to improve public health in my sphere. But it's like any tool. It's like fire. Fire can either burn you or cook your food. A hammer can either build you a house or bludgeon somebody to death, you know? You just have to know how to wield these tools, I think, appropriately. And I think it ultimately comes down to skills. Like, you need to be able to bring a critical lens to these discussions.
Absolutely. And that's a personal decision. Like, we all have to choose to be part of the solution. Otherwise, we're just part of the problem. And I think it's so easy to project the problems. It's like, oh, it's just the lunatic left or the fascist right. When in reality, it's like, look, we are all contributing to the culture with every unexamined thought that we allow, every unexamined word that we speak, every comment that we leave on social media that's nasty or thoughtless or divisive, every rumor that we spread. Like, we're all part of this. So look, you don't need to have a platform of millions of people listening to you to be a part of the solution. And what's happened is we have all these conversation about like rights and what rights people have, but we don't have a proportionate conversation about responsibility, because responsibility actually requires you to do something rather than just be given something. And we can all be responsible for healing the situation that we're in. And you can do that immediately. But it starts with a level of humility to recognize, okay, I'm contributing to this culture, and I'm actually powerful enough to, at least within my sphere of influence, change it.
How can people better identify rhetoric versus objective fact, objective truth?
Yeah, I think there's a few ways. One easy tell is sensationalism. So when someone is sensationalizing, so for example, putting in really charged language into what they're saying, or using all caps, or calling people names, which is more ad hominem, those are all pretty good signs that someone's not actually thinking clearly and they're actually just emoting through their words. So we can all have like a heuristic, like a mental shortcut for spotting bias. I think that's an easy one. So when I see on social media, like someone's typing in all caps, or they're using a bunch of names, or they're even using these terms that are not well defined, like fascist or communist or whatever, that's usually a pretty good sign that they're not giving you an objective take, or they're not even trying to be objective. And I think that's the difference. It's not so much that some people are objective, some people are subjective. I think we're all subjects, but we can all strive to be objective. Another pretty clear sign is when people are presenting a caricature of the opposite side's arguments and attacking that, which is called straw manning. So straw manning is when you misrepresent or oversimplify the opposition's argument and attack that. So like attacking a scarecrow, right? versus steel manning. So a pretty good heuristic is, hey, if it seems like the argument that they're presenting of the opposite side is an insanely bad argument, they're probably not presenting the other side's argument well. Like, as you said, you experienced, you worked for Al Gore and you went through all this stuff, but you're able to see, oh, actually these other people, they're not stupid, they're not insane, they just have different values. So it's rare that the other side doesn't have anything, any logic, any rationale to what they're saying. So if someone is presenting me an opinion in a way that sounds stupid, I'm actually more suspicious of the person who's presenting the argument than the person whose argument they're representing. So that's actually a really good sign. And everyone can just go in their social media feed and, open X or Instagram, TikTok, and you can pretty quickly see who's being emotional and who's just triggering you, who's using words that don't actually have great meaning, well-defined terms, versus who's at least trying. And as you said, I like to believe that part of the rise of my own brand over the last year is because I'm at least trying to be fair. Like, maybe objective is too much of a claim, but I'm trying to at least represent the opposite side well. I'm trying to understand what I'm going to disagree with, even though I disagree with it. And I think that's a reasonable place for us to all settle, because we're not all going to agree. That shouldn't be the goal even, but we can at least understand.
Yeah. People are, I think, very readily willing to make rhetorical mistakes. I see it in the world of nutrition all the time. For example, if I show a study that, makes, for example, we'll just use red meat as an example, appear favorably. The first question that's often asked by people who I would say are not the most critical in terms of their thinking is, well, who funded this study? And what I think the mistake there is that a lot of nutrition research is funded by the food industry. So if the funding, disregarding the fact that regardless of where the funding comes from, a study still, if it's published in a peer-reviewed journal, still has to undergo peer review.
Yes.
Right? If you're going to dismiss that study because of the funder, well, then you've got to dismiss all of the studies that have food industry funding.
Yeah.
But people are unwilling to do that. They're only seeing it through their priors, yes. Right? That red meat is unhealthy. All, favorable red meat studies are funded by the beef industry or whatever. And so, yeah, it's just a really obvious illustration.
Yeah, that's a great one. And there's a few things going on there. One is genetic fallacy, which I mentioned earlier, so dismissing something based on its source. Another is guilt by association. So it's oh, well, this person is connected to this organization, and this organization said or did something bad one time. Therefore, I'm going to dismiss everything this person's saying. And the thing with guilt by association is it's not that it's nothing, right? It's relevant if a red meat study is funded by Tyson, but it doesn't discount the validity of the information outright. It's just I think people struggle to think probabilistically. It's instead of something being from 0 to 100%, and it could be anything in that range, it's either yes or it's no. And I think this is what people do when they just feel overwhelmed with information, because it's hard to think. It literally costs a lot of energy to think. You think of a chess grandmaster, and they do these studies where they hook up electrodes, and they study how many calories they burn in a chess match, and it's a lot. So yeah, thinking through something and stopping for long enough to actually understand a single study is incredibly difficult. So what will happen is if something that people hear confirms their worldview, they won't have a very high standard of evidence. It'll be yep, just moving on. I agree with that. So I'm not going to scrutinize this. But if it challenges their worldview, all of a sudden the bar is extremely high for accepting it. And the bar should actually be equal. It should just be, okay, I recognize this is feeding what I want to hear, but let me make sure it's actually true. And if I don't have the time to verify whether it's true, let me just not assume it is. You can have a degree of confidence. I'm 80% sure it's true, but also apply that for information that you dislike. And I see this in politics all the time. Are you familiar with Zohran Mamdani? Have you heard about him?
Yeah, he's running to be mayor of New York, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he stands out because he would be the first Muslim mayor. He's a democratic socialist, which is a branch of socialism, not exactly the same thing. And a lot of people are really triggered by that. And he's also very anti-Trump. He's honestly, people are not going to like this, but he's kind of like Trump's foil. He's like the Trump of the left in many ways. He's kind of his equal opposite. Charismatic, populist, really has actually really high emotional intelligence, and I think Trump doesn't get enough credit. He understands people. If you don't like how he uses that understanding, that's one thing. But Zoran, he like actually understands New Yorkers. But people will say stuff like, oh, well, he appeared in this picture with this person who said this one thing one time. Same thing with Trump. Oh, he was friends with this one person who did one bad thing one time. And they'll use that to dismiss the entire argument. When in reality, it's like, look, life is complex, man. And it's, if we're just going to discount someone because of one bad thing that we heard, or even a set of bad things, and say everything bad about them, I believe, everything good about them, I don't believe, it's very hard to get anywhere. There's no possibility of connection there. So it's the same thing with information, like health information. People will just, and I get why people don't want to read a study. They don't even know how to read a study. But just don't be so confident then that you know that something's right or wrong.
Exactly. Yeah, I don't follow Zoran too closely. I mean, part of that has to do with the fact that I no longer live in New York, but that's where I'm from. And and all I've seen are essentially what's been clipped out and made to go viral on social media.
And I'm that's very present for me right now, actually, because over the last few weeks, I've taken a little bit of a break, slowed down the content. And I was kind of feeling like, okay, I feel like there's a shift in my content because I feel like I went more toward the right and more of that, like, okay, here, I agree with the right on this and that. And I was like, okay, I need to bring it a little bit more back to center. Not because anyone's expecting it of me, but I was feeling a little bit out of alignment. And yeah, I remember I had resistance to Zoran because I was like, I don't like the idea of socialism. I don't know any socialist countries that are successful. People cite like Scandinavian countries. No, those are capitalist countries with social safety nets. They're not socialists. So I looked at what he was saying. I saw some comments about, he wants to tax richer and whiter neighborhoods. I was like, I don't like that racial language. And yeah, I recognized I had resistance. And then I went back and I just listened to an interview with him. I listened to a debate with him. I was like, okay, I still disagree with a lot of his worldview, but I get why people like him. So unfortunately, there's such a deluge of information these days that, yeah, it's impossible to investigate everything. And I get that. And I like to use AI to compress that process a lot, but that also has its issues. And there's no substitute for critical thinking and sharpening your mind. But yeah, I just want to invite people to just be, honestly, we just have a lot of arrogance. We're just like really arrogant in our views. And somehow we know even less, but we think we know more. And we're so attached to our beliefs as if a belief dies, then we die. But that's not the case.
Do you think, though, that, we're at a natural disadvantage with these, having brains that have evolved millions of years ago, well, hundreds of thousands of years ago, if you count, if you're looking strictly at anatomically modern humans, but we evolved in a world where our brains only needed to contend with what was going on locally and where the world around us progressed in a much more linear way. And now it's like, it's almost like, we can take what's been going on in Gaza, for example. Like Hamas attacked Israel. You can trace the conflict back, well beyond that. But these images of war are now circulating on social media in a way where that technologically speaking was impossible prior to just a couple of decades ago. And so our brains now are having to contend with reality in a way that's much more vast and much broader than it ever had been in human history. And so I feel like we're at an inherent disadvantage when it comes to grappling with the reality of life.
We are. And I've been thinking, how do we actually solve that, right? Because we have this old hardware, but this new software, I guess, that we're trying to adopt. And look, I fundamentally believe in human spirit and our ability to find ingenious solutions to novel problems. And I think we'll solve this stuff. And again, I think a lot of it comes back to personal responsibility for our own growth and expansion of our own minds. But yeah, we are at a disadvantage. But you said earlier that social media has a positive, right? And the positive, if we look at the Gaza situation, people have talked about it's a genocide, and some people are like, no, it's not a genocide, but it is horrible. Some people say, no, it's Israel's just defending itself. But we know what's novel about that whole conflict is that if we look at the scale of the devastation, it pales into comparison against a lot of the atrocities of the 20th century. But the difference is because people can actually see what's going on their phone, it actually elicits the proper response, which is this needs to stop immediately. Like, I don't care if it's 10,000 people or 1 million people, this is not okay.
Right.
So that's actually one of the advantages, right? Because prior to that, there's always been a lot of conflict in the world, and we weren't evolved to care about the tribe beyond our immediate community. And now we can care about someone who's 1,000 miles away, and we can act on that because we can see what's going on. So that's kind of the benefit too. And yeah, I think a lot of what you're doing with Genius and your brand and helping people just like take care of their bodies, take care of their mind is part of that upgrade process that we all need to go through. And yeah, it requires like a mental, emotional, and spiritual upgrade for all of us.
Yeah. How do we get there? I mean, I find that for me, like I've got my own sort of publishing world where I reach my audience, but finding objective truth is, I almost don't know where to turn other than the peer-reviewed literature for my specific domain. But anything that I wouldn't consider myself having expert level knowledge in, it's like you can't trust Wikipedia. AI sources from mostly Reddit and Wikipedia. And I think Elon Musk is doing a great thing, like at least what he projects, in terms of where his heart is and building tools for people to gain more instantaneous access to objective fact, without any of the sort of gatekeepers of yore. But it's hard today. It's like, going back to food. It's like the modern supermarket today is 75% ultra processed foods.
Yeah.
I would say our information environment is probably even higher than that with regards to ultra processing and spin and bias.
I think the good news is it can be hard to know what's true, but it's easier to know what's false. And what I mean by that is, yes, different sides. Let's say, just to simplify things, there are two sides, right? So maybe it's like the carnivore diet people and the vegan people. They're probably both going to agree that Ritz crackers are bad for you. Similarly, the right and the left politically, there's certain things they're going to be able to converge on. And if you find out that both sides are agreeing on some of the ground facts, those ground facts are probably true, right? So, and this took a while, but eventually we got to a point as a country where we're like, yeah, the southern border is an issue. It is an open border right now. There might be disagreement on why it's open. There might be disagreement on what immigration policy should be. But at some point, the debate was not about whether the border is open and millions of people are entering the country. It was about what we should do about it. So if you can look at both sides, again, vary your information diet, you can see what's common between the sides, and that's usually close to the truth. Because the truth is a really high standard, but having a shared sense of reality is a lower standard that we can pretty easily get to. So with AI, for example, a lot of the time I'll just ask it when there's ever a charged political issue or something confusing. It's like, hey, can you give me the best arguments for and against this thing? And then I'll read the best argument for, the best argument against, and I'll see what's common between these sides. Like, okay, this is probably the truth. Same thing with like Israel, Palestine, that whole conflict, right? It's like, okay, like people are disputing, what globalizing intifada means or from the river to the sea means and all of that, but no one's disputing that Israel is dropping bombs in Gaza right now, right? So we know that's true. Whether you think that's justified or not is a different question. So, yeah, I think this is why it's so important to get outside of our echo chamber, because when you're in your echo chamber, truth and lies, there's no tension on them. So you can't see the things that quickly fall apart, and lies fall apart because they're not strong. Lies need to be repeated over and over for them to have force, but the truth stands alone.
Are you familiar with, I forget, is it Bertolini's law? It's that it's essentially that it takes a lot more effort to debunk lies and BS than it does to put lies and BS out into the world. And so there's like this asymmetry,
Yeah.
basically, that mistruths they take a lot more effort on the part of the debunker than the effort required to just seed the world with bullshit.
I haven't heard that. Yeah, and it's like this offense-defense asymmetry. I have to think about that more to see if I think that's true. But I would say, regardless, it's not that difficult for someone to debunk a lie in the modern social media context, because a lot of what's going on is people are just giving a bunch of short form. And you could just literally go watch the long form if you want. Like it takes the will. It's not impossible. So, for example, I told you with Zoran, like I'm trying to revise my thesis on him just so I understand even someone I disagree with. With Trump, I remember being told that he called neo-Nazis and white supremacists very fine people, and I just watched the YouTube video. And I was like, oh, he didn't say that.
He didn't say that, yeah.
Yeah, and it was actually that simple, but I had to pause long enough to be curious, and I had to be courageous enough to challenge my own beliefs, even if they didn't align with my tribe. That's actually the hard part. I don't think it's as hard to get to the truth as people think, or a debunk lies. I think what's hard is getting people to feel comfortable challenging their long-held beliefs.
Yeah, but I think a big red flag is being able to identify when people are using those rhetorical devices, whether it's that, the illustration that you just painted, or people who claim that Elon Musk gave a Nazi salute, early on in the, during the campaign, or the bloodbath hoax. Like all it takes is just like a tiny bit of effort to go and see that. No, Elon's a spaz. Like he was thanking his audience. He was, projecting from his heart to the audience that was there for him. The bloodbath was a complete, taken out of context by the media. But it's the people that parrot that, or convicted felon over and over and over again. You know what I'm saying? It's just like, it's so disingenuous to me that right there, like that would be cause for me to dismiss pretty much anything else that somebody's saying if they lack the critical thinking, just to be able to dismiss those fallacies.
Yeah, it's kind of like, lies are viral. But the good news is the vaccine to these viruses is near at hand for all of us. So it might feel widespread, like these beliefs, but it's not that deep. It's not grounded. Because again, you could literally just I remember actually a friend, she sent me the video of Elon doing allegedly the Nazi salute, and I literally saw within 5 seconds, you realize part of this is edited out, right? You realize there's a jump cut from the part where he waves his hand out and cutting out the part where he says, "My heart goes out to you." And all I did is I pointed that out. I was like, hey, do you realize this is edited? And they didn't respond at first, but I like to think it provoked them into some level of doubt, even though they didn't immediately say, oh, you know what, you're right, and I've completely misread the situation. It takes, time for people to do that and a level of safety for them to do that. But you can just do that when you come across lies. Just counter with the truth. And I also think that there's kind of this ripple effect that happens very quickly, where you don't need everyone to be saying the truth at once. You just need a few courageous people to go first. One of the biggest things that happened when Trump got shot, which is actually the first day that I started talking about politics online in a big way, was Elon not only endorsed Trump, I actually think it was even more impactful that he invited him to have a one-on-one long-form conversation. They just held an interview on X and they live streamed it. And just hearing two people talk for a longer period of time was awakening for so many people. So again, these lies are not rooted deeply. It's just that they go broad. They're wide, not deep. And yeah, the truth is deep because the truth stands alone. So when you just show someone's like, hey, you can just watch this long form video and you can see the full context of a clip, it's very hard to dispute that. What will happen is people will move on to another lie. It's like, well, he didn't say that white supremacists are very fine people, but he did say grab him by the pee. Or he didn't. Maybe that was in conscious locker room talk, but he also said this other thing about immigrants, and they keep on moving, and there's kind of this. It's not infinite, but there's infinite feeling regress from lie to misrepresentation to mischaracterization. And I think as someone who, if you're genuinely interested in the truth and not just one-upping the other person, you just be patient. Because ultimately, this is not about an ego battle to prove that I'm right and you're wrong. It's about believing that the truth is an inherent good, and we can all help each other get to it. But I think sometimes people will like weaponize the truth and be like, oh, well, this person's just dumb. This person's an idiot. They're insane, which is not bringing anyone closer to the truth, right? So, yeah, I'm fundamentally optimistic. I think the truth just wins in the end.
Yeah.
But it takes trust in the truth.
I think that there's this duality in society that that kind of mirrors the duality that you see in biology, you know, masculine and feminine. I mean, going back to like philosophy, again, just to reiterate what I said earlier, I think that regardless of which side of the aisle you're on in this, unfortunately, two-party system, but I think it actually makes sense that we have a two-party system when you consider the duality that exists in so many other areas of life and in nature, that it's masculine and feminine, but both want the same thing ultimately. It's just that they have different ways, different projected methods of arriving at the same ultimately goal.
I love that you said that, because I've been thinking a lot in terms of masculine and feminine dynamics, looking at the political landscape, because I would say that the right is more masculine and the left is more feminine. And I think that was actually even embodied in the candidates. I mean, is Trump hyper-masculine alpha male versus Kamala ultra-compassionate female? And then there's even like he's white and she's black, and there's all these like interesting collisions of dualities. And I think one of the biggest mistakes people can make is to say, I don't need the other half. I can just do this alone. It's like, no, men need women, women need men. And we are equal but not equivalent. We're different. And unfortunately, what happens is when one side doesn't understand the other, there's just nothing to them. It's like these are just a bunch of crazy women or evil men. And what a loss that is, because we actually do genuinely need each other, and no side has exclusive access to the truth. Now, I'm not someone who believes that the truth is directly in the middle all the time. It's like, no, I'm not shy about my political beliefs. I think the truth is, for me, it's more on the right now. I think that's what the correction that we needed in this country. But it would be foolish to say that, yeah, they're 100% right all the time and the other side is 0% right. So, yeah, I think it's also, there's a deeper thing that's going on between masculine and feminine and men and women, and it's this versus when it needs to be together.
Yeah, and it's like this cyclical, oscillation that occurs. I forget the exact verbiage, but it's like strong men create easy times create soft men create hard times create hard men, and it just goes back and forth.
Yeah,
historically, I mean, you could probably go back, centuries and see that cycle repeating itself.
I agree, and I think it's funny sitting in LA talking about this, because I remember I went to like a church service. It's kind of this non-denominational church. And then the preacher, he goes up there, and he's like, he's talking about like spiritual, religious stuff, and then he sneaks in toxic masculinity. I was like, do we have to do that right now? And I was like, I get what you mean. I think there is such a thing as toxic masculinity, but I don't actually hear the opposite. Like, what about toxic femininity? What about men being emasculated and demonized? What about men being dismissed as not needed at all? I think what's happened is, weak men created hard times. And I think part of what happened in the 2024 election, where people look, we like to think that we're just logical, but we're more emotionally driven than anything. And people resonated with a strong man who seemed like he could get a lot of this structural stuff in hand. And I think actually the border, which is a boundary, was symbolic of that. It's like, if we don't have boundaries, which is the masculine prerogative to provide boundaries and to say no, what do we have? How can you build anything if there's no lines?
Boundaries and definitions.
And definitions, yeah. And even a lot of the gender stuff, like the man-woman stuff, like all of it was getting really confused and muddled and over-feminized. And we need lines and we need curves. And I'm glad that a line has been put in place. And we also shouldn't let it go too far, because we do need the room for the more emotional piece of life and the more flowy and the curves. So, I love that we're talking about this.
Yeah, no, it's so great. Tactically, what does, like, if you could offer my listeners a morning routine for somebody who's really looking to optimize their information diet, what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So I think it starts with self-awareness. I'm a huge fan of journaling, because journaling helps you see how you're thinking. And the clearer you are on how you're thinking, the more clear you can be on how other people are thinking. I think part of the problem here is we're all being challenged to look at ourselves. And there's a Jesus quote that I really love, which is, why do you protest the speck in someone else's eye without seeing the log in your own? So we're so focused on, well, they're doing something wrong and that's what they did and they're so bad. And it's like, yeah, you might even be right that they're more wrong than you, but have you taken accountability for your piece first? And that's a daily, lifelong process. Like, where am I thinking in ways that are irrational, or thinking in ways that cause me to hate myself or feel depressed or feel angry or act in a mentally ill way? I mean, we're all mentally ill. It's just varying degrees of mental illness, really. So I actually think just strictly journaling is actually, I think it's really a cure-all for a lot of this, just ironing out your thoughts on things. And then going past that, there's basic things like, this is not a sponsor plug, they are a sponsor of me, Ground News. They have a great app that is just a news aggregator that shows you both sides. And that alone is revolutionary. Just getting to see, okay, this is how one side is reporting it. At least I see their perspective, because if you're not actively seeking out an alternative perspective, you're not really gonna see it. So if you're gonna go check the news, a lot of people, they'll just jump to their favorite news source. Maybe check something like Ground News or All Sides, something that gives you an aggregation of the views from both sides. And none of them are perfect, but at least they're designed to expose you to the information that you might be missing.
Yeah, I love Ground News.
Yeah, it's great. And then as you're consuming information from other sources, right? Everyone's gonna have their favorite source. That's totally okay. It's okay to get algorithmically fed. Just develop the mental habit of, anytime you consume something, just question, what am I actually taking in here? Like, what's actually being said? And just slow down. Like, if we just slow down and consumed less information over a longer period of time, that would actually solve a lot of it. But short form culture has meant we're getting a lot of fragments of information that's not integrated with one another, and we're going through it so fast. Just like, swipe, whatever, share. Particularly when we're sharing stuff, like, people will have this instinct to feel emotion and immediately share it out. It's like, just sit with that emotion for a second and actually process that information before you immediately start spreading that. Because you might be spreading something that is not even just not true. It's like incredibly biased and unproductive. And it's just feeding your own convictions rather than enhancing your thinking.
Yeah. When it comes to social media, are you a fan of getting your information from a platform like X? I mean, I happen to really love X. I think that what Elon has done to the platform, and I don't know Elon, I have no affiliation with X, but just the fact that you can seek out alternate viewpoints and there are no gatekeepers, there is no censorship at this point. I mean, the algorithm, does definitely cater to the type of content that you engage most with. But, even just this past week, he announced that ultimately there's going to be an AI aspect to it where you can literally ask it to provide you with, alternate viewpoints, to reduce the amount of political content in your feed, et cetera. Like ultimately, the fact that X exists is, for me, cause for optimism.
Yes, I love X, and I use it every day. It's my favorite for gathering information. And for the same reasons that you said, it's open information, there's no censorship, but there's also no standards. So it's just about keeping it in its proper place. These outlets that people are increasingly distrustful of, which they should have a healthy degree of skepticism, CNN, New York Times, and then on the right, again, I think everyone kind of knew Fox News is biased, but just to be fair, Daily Wire. They're organizations that have accountability to either shareholders or they're making revenue off an audience, and there's just a lot more scrutiny. And there's journalists there who actually went to school for journalism and practiced to some degree trying to get to objective truth. On the internet, it can be anyone, bro. It can be a kid in their basement who has an AI avatar breaking the news. And their breaking news is just some text and a fancy picture that they got off Google. And there's no sourcing, none of that. Whereas as a journalist, even if you have an anonymous source, if people find out that you had an anonymous source and it was all made up, you can lose your livelihood. You have your whole professional reputation ruined. Your name is actually on the line because you're not going to be an anonymous reporter for New York Times. So it's important to just have all the stuff in its proper place. So yeah, I use ground news, and I use X, and I use Instagram, and I use TikTok. Now, obviously, I'm a professional in this and who's made this his path. You don't need to do that. You don't need to be spending hours researching this stuff a day. Just recognize the pros and the cons of each platform, because there's no panacea. There's no one platform that's going to solve all the issues for us. And yeah, I'm happy to hear about the ability to prompt Grok to adjust your algorithm for you. I think that's great, but it still requires you prompting it properly. So if you're not asking quality questions and you're not seeking to get objective, neutral information, you're not going to get it. And then the AI itself, as you said, can be trained on Reddit and Wikipedia and these heavily biased sources. So you still need to know how to tell when AI is giving you a biased answer or just straight up hallucinating and making stuff up. But yeah, I love X, and I love it for what it is, and I also know what it's not.
Yeah, I'm super excited for what Elon. And again, I don't know Elon personally. I'm generally a fan. I think like everything he's putting out into the world. I mean, look, he can be a bit of a loose cannon on his platform. He's earned that, I think. But what he's done with Neuralink, with Starlink, with is it Neuralink? Yeah. Obviously Tesla, SpaceX. I mean, he's like a modern Edison, and so I'm very grateful for him. But in particular, that he's now taking on Wikipedia, I think is just incredible. And I used to think that Wikipedia was an incredible resource, but it's become so biased, and it really is controlled. I mean, I want people to be really skeptical of anything that they glean from Wikipedia, because it literally is controlled by a cabal of I don't know, people just like unhinged, ideologically captured. I mean, I'm speaking specifically of like the nutrition side of things, but what the Wikipedia editors have done to my own page, it's shown me very plainly, like up close, that the system can be manipulated.
Absolutely.
And so I'm super excited for Grokopedia.
Me too. Yeah, I mean, Wikipedia has gotten to the point these days where, if I'm doing research and AI pulls information from Wikipedia, I look for another source.
Same.
Just because, it's so ideologically captured, and I'd say strong leftist bias on Wikipedia in particular, kind of like Reddit. When we talk about sources of information, you should also be able to understand there are gradations of quality. It's like kind of like processed factory farm versus organic free range, right? There's gradations of quality, so not all sources are made equal, and Wikipedia is one of those sources I consider very low quality.
Yeah, I think it was amazing for the time in which it came to prominence. It was very Web 2.0, but I think that now with the tools of AI, and especially I think in light of the fact that there is this sort of broader understanding that reality isn't always objective, and that it's become such a big and powerful source. It's like the default source for so many of these large language models, as well as even Google itself. I mean, you search for anything and Wikipedia is like right there at the top. I think that's hugely problematic. So I'm optimistic, and I wish Grokopedia nothing but the best.
Yeah, and I think a good way to spot bias on Wikipedia, for example, to just give people practical tips, is again go back to like sensationalism and ad hominem. So let's talk a little bit more about ad hominem. So ad hominem is Latin for to the person. So ad hominem arguments are focused on attacking the person rather than attacking the points. So if you go to like the RFK Jr. Wikipedia article, I think in like one of the first few sentences, unless they've updated it, it calls it a conspiracy theorist. So it's like, okay, you just labeled the person. And I guess you could say conspiracy theorist is a neutral term. It's pretty much a pejorative these days. And you can call him a conspiracy theorist, but it's more precise to talk about the specific things that you consider conspiracies. And if the implication is that he was wrong, show how he was wrong. So I'm big on let's reduce big terms to precise definitions. Instead of saying conspiracy theorist, let's talk about the things that he's had a contrarian view on that are correct, and also the ones that are incorrect. Same thing with anti-vax. What does that mean? Anti-all vaccines? Fascist. What does that mean? Does it mean totalitarian control of private industry and merging that with the government, or does it just mean that you don't like that this person's challenging the judiciary and trying to deport people? Communist, what does that mean? Is that the same thing as socialist? Because socialists, they both have in common owning the means of production, but does that mean that everyone has the equal amount of resources? And then there's democratic socialists. That means something different than the other two. So we just want to be really precise and drill down. And one of the best conversational tools, because I don't want people to just think clearly but converse well, because we need each other to get to the truth, is you can just ask people questions in conversations over and over until you drill down to a point where they realize they don't actually know what they're talking about. And I mean that in the nicest way. Like a lot of times we just say terms and we don't know what it actually means.
Yeah.
And then you can actually invite a real conversation. So, I was at a party and we're playing like one of these like card games where it's like almost like Cards Against Humanity. So it's like a card and has a controversial claim. And then there's a card about white privilege. And so the whole conversation started about white privilege. And there are people who are, dark skin, light skin, all colors of the rainbow. And one of the first questions we asked in the conversation is, well, what's white privilege? Can we define that? Is there black privilege? Does every ethnicity or color have a privilege? And what I find is that instead of immediately fighting someone when you don't like what they say, if you just get curious and you ask enough questions, A, it helps the other person feel safer and their ego's not on high alert. And B, you can actually get on the same page about what you're even talking about. A lot of the time, I don't even think people even know we're not talking about the same thing. And one person's using a term like racism, and that means a completely different thing than the other person. Like, is racism talking about race at all? Is racism a stereotype? What if it's a positive stereotype? What if it's just basic pattern recognition? Like, what are we actually talking about? So that's another tool I would encourage everyone. Like, curiosity is such a cure. If you just learn to ask questions rather than fight immediately, your conversations will transform.
Amen. Dude, well, it's so good getting to know you. Again, you're one of my favorite follows, and I think the work that you're putting out is so important. It's so timely, and I really do think that it is a vaccine of sorts to the kind of confusion and hysteria that seems to be so ubiquitous today.
Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you. And I feel like you really recognize what I'm doing. So this has been one of my favorite interviews ever. You're such a good host,
Dope,
and
dude.
You're genuinely interested in hearing what I have to say. And I think hopefully your audience got a lot out of this. And as you said at the beginning, it's not just about what to think, it's about how to think. And I think if we can learn to actually enjoy considering alternative perspectives and being curious rather than condemnatory, we can have a radically transformed society, and it won't take long either.
Well, that's my hope. That's my wish for everybody listening to this. I've got one last question for you, but before we get to that, I know you've got this incredible program. Again, you're super active on social media, so just drop all your handles and ways for people to connect with you and consume your content.
Yeah, so they can find me at That's Kaizen on all platforms, so THATSKAIZEN. And I'm active on pretty much all the social media platforms, but my hub is actually Substack. So if you go to thatskaizen.substack.com, I have longer form videos, exclusive videos, and I also have a course and community called Clear Thinker. So Clear Thinker is two things. One, it's a course to equip you with the critical thinking tools that you need to see past the media bias and confusion that is being inflicted upon all of us. And two, it's a community that is a sane space for having conversations about taboo issues, breaking news, hot headlines, in a way that is based on trying to actually get to the truth in a non-hostile environment. So Clear Thinker Academy, if you want to join, would love to have you.
Amazing. What does living a genius life mean to you?
Genius. I've been thinking about this term, genius, and I don't actually know the etymology of it, but I think part of the etymology of it is actually from like genie. And genie doesn't, I think when we think genius, like, oh, that person's a genius. And I like to think of genius as something that's actually coming to you, like through and to you. It's like being inspired. It's producing something that you didn't even know that you're capable of producing. And yeah, for me, I feel like when I have a moment of genius, it's less that I did something. It's almost like I channeled something. Like I just created something that I didn't even expect to create. And I think a lot of it comes from when I'm quiet enough to listen to myself and withdraw from the outside world rather than get swept up in all the noise and confusion and the chaos. And I think that by that definition, we all have access to genius. It's everywhere. It's just a question of who is willing to answer the call for it.
Beautifully put. Damn. Well, thanks for coming out. Appreciate you. Thank you guys for listening. Share this episode with friends and loved ones that you think may benefit from it. And yeah, love you all. Catch you on the next episode. Peace.
Peace.
Hey, if you liked that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.